Our mission is the extinction of magic.
Let's talk about the Arthurian legend in general. Why do you think this is something that we keep wanting to revisit in different ways, see it from different characters' perspectives?
It's really interesting you ask that, because like I've always been a real fan of history and a real fan of fantasy, and you see so many different perspectives and retakes of the Arthurian legend. Particularly with King Arthur and Merlin and the Knights of the Round Table, there's just a lot of that folklore and mythology that's kind of, I think, ingrained in some way in our literature. But it's interesting because, we never really see it from the female characters within this epic tale. Like you said, I mean, this is something that's been told over and over again. It's been, part of literature for hundreds of years. And so I think it's kind of bizarre in a way that this is the first time we're seeing a kind of an origin story, if you will, from one of its most prolific and powerful characters, the Lady of the Lake.
Yeah, I mean, she's like, oh, gee, she kicks everything off. There is no Arthur without her. Like, Nicki Minaj, she like birthed him kind of like that. So what do you think is going to be interesting for folks to kind of get to see this character? What are they not necessarily going to, what can they expect from her, since she's not someone that's talked about as much in the books?
I mean, I don't know. I think maybe I'm biased, but the best thing I think to think about or expect going into this is expect nothing. Just go in it with an open kind of mind and be ready to see what you see. I mean, within this series, obviously we have these iconic characters like Merlin, like Arthur, like they're all there, but they're there in a way that you've never seen them before. And I think especially with her and with Nimue, it's such a kind of unique tale, and it's I think it's familiar, but it's also a very clean new lens. And so I just say go into it open-minded with no expectations and take something fresh from something that's so old and familiar.
Well, one thing they can't expect just from the trailers is how much like horse and sword fighting is like throughout this, and having seen it, there's even more than you think. So I'm just going to ask, which was harder for you, the horse or the sword fighting? Because I know you had to spend a lot of time with both.
That's a really good question. I actually trained as a former athlete. I was a swimmer for nearly 10 years, and I was really excited to be able to use my body in a way that I hadn't before with other roles. It's tough because I loved the sword fighting, and I think with the sword fighting, it's something that I'd love to dive deeper into if we continue this story. But I worked with our amazing fight choreographer, Mo, to really find a specific fight style for Nimue, because the sword that you see and all the weapons that you see, they are traditionally catered for men. And so, our fight styles that we see often in film and TV, they are predominantly catered towards men. So it was really interesting being able to take time to develop that. But I also love horses. Like, I'm such a sucker for animals and horses, and I really did enjoy that bit. So I might have to lean more towards the horses, but I did love both.
That's surprising for me, because I figured you would have said the sword, because you do some really cool sword stuff. I mean, it's the sword, right? It's Excalibur. Yeah. But I will say you also kick some butt. And like, if we're going to say for Netflix, like the two, like the king and queen of fantasy would be Nimue and Geralt of Rivia. So I'm just curious, who do you think wins going toe to toe?
That's a good, I mean, Geralt's got like a couple of 100 years of training. We see Nimue and she's just taking the sword. So if you give Nimue like a couple of years of training, I don't know. I mean, it could go either way, but I think there's a lot that we haven't seen from Nimue yet. So I'm kind of behind her. I'm also biased.
Right. Really quick, you guys were having to film this over, a long period of time. It's basically 10 mini independent films that you're trying to like put together to make this really epic story. So I'm just curious, what was the best part and maybe the worst part of having to do this like really long and really, I would say, high value production?
I mean, I kind of feel like you just said it. I mean, on one hand, this probably was it was the most grueling shoot I've ever done. And I've been lucky enough to do film and TV, and TV is such a different beast. But, to do something this epic, which you often see in films, And then to shove that into 10 months, into, like you said, kind of 10 1-hour films, it's a lot of work. And it does take a toll on your body. And even just to keep up with the story, not only, you know, keep on top of the physical side of it and the horse riding and the training and the making sure you don't get injured, but also keeping tabs on the story, because Nimue's entire journey is locked in with this story. So every time there was a script change, I would have to go to Tom. I think that was a really incredible learning experience, but also, like, it was so cool. I don't know if I can swear on this. I was going to say so cool, but like,
do it, girl. Say it just like that.
And it was seriously to like walk onto set and to kind of literally walk in her shoes every day and be around horses and sword fighting. I mean, like, as a fan of this genre, it's just so cool to be able to do. So, like, it comes at a price, but I mean, that gets weighed out. Like, it was so much fun.
I promised her and Arthur, and I will keep that promise.
What is harder when you're making a comic book adaptation, and what really makes a good sort of like graphic novel adaptation? What are the elements?
I think everything depends on your partners, you know, and I've been very, very lucky in that respect. But I'd say what makes a good adaptation is, well, your source material has to be the kind of thing that can be adapted. It has to be something where the pictures are telling the story, you know, something that isn't preaching along with its words so much that you've got nothing to look at. And beyond that, you need to have capable minds and hands to make it all come real. I can mention everything from set design to the directing to all the big guns like that. But let me bring it down to some smaller things. I've had the opportunity to work with excellent people in costume and in weapons makers, for instance, and property and prop makers. These people work very, very swiftly and with great skill. Some of them have to make things that look absolutely perfect, but may only hold together for the moments you're shooting because they have to do it so quickly. But I would get ideas on the set of Curse for the costuming of Nimue that would be very complex, cross-stitching down the side of her legs, for instance. And the costumer would come back with the leggings within no time at all. And when it came to swords, I would ask for swords, and there'd be an array waiting within the hour. And at one point, Tom and I actually came up with a horrible scene that I couldn't resist doing because I've had my problems with teeth in my life. I said, we've got to have a medieval dental surgery scene. And, you know, Tom gave the nod, and so we put in the request to have someone come in with medieval dental tools.
That was that was a rough meeting, I'll tell you. The dental torture implements meeting. That was.
But you'd have fainted if you'd seen these things.
Absolutely.
Well, that's good. I mean, also
the cornucopia of talent you're dealing with. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, and like you mentioned with the swords, if you're gonna do an Arthurian legend, you better have a sword. You gotta have Excalibur. But it brings me to like the bigger point, which is that why, and I'm gonna start with you, Tom, why do you think people are still drawn to the Arthurian legend and want to see it with, you know, different adaptations and different perspectives? Like, why are we continually wanting to revisit this from a storytelling aspect?
It really is a foundation stone of so many stories that we love. It's you know, from Star Wars to Lord of the Rings to, I mean, you can just, everything seems to owe a debt to this imagery and these characters and the unbelievable combination of romance, betrayal, redemption, as Frank has said, you know, characters who kind of are trying to pull civilization out of a barbaric world. So I think it has had moments where it's revived and disappeared and revived again. I mean, I think it's relevant to today. You know, I think some of the, you know, it was important to us to bring something new to the table because it is a story that's been told for 1,000 years. So for me, I think, you know, my daughter was 10 or 11 when we first started talking about this story. And for me, it was important to see if there was, a character in this mythology that we could build out, that she might get attached to, that, this idea that a woman held the sword of power before King Arthur, hopefully could empower her and, give her that sense of, that kind of thing we felt, because that drawing the sword, taking control of your destiny at a point where you might not feel ready, but is so universal and belongs to men and women. And I think, just briefly, there was a moment, early on when my daughter came to set and saw Katherine, as Nimue, and the full costume with the sword of power, and had that moment of like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And, had all these questions, and it was just a little bit of a geek out moment for myself and for Katherine, as we realized like, okay, that was part of the goal, is to give the women heroes of this mythology their due.
Well, now we're not strangers. I'm Arthur.
So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I feel bad because I'm sure you're going to get it a lot, but let's just put it out there. Who's the better leader, Arthur, Barack Obama?
I'm going to go with Nimue because we've seen more of it, but it's one of those things where I think he hasn't earned the right to lead at this point, and he's still discovering himself. But definitely Nimue.
You learned a lot playing a politician. That's a good political answer. Listen. But I mean, it brings us to a point, though. Obviously, Arthur's been played by a lot of people, from everyone from, Sean Connery to the guys from Monty Python. So what did you particularly want to bring to this character? What did you want to put your stamp on it with the material you were given and just how you approached him?
Yeah, my whole thing was I never wanted to play the legend, the myth. I never wanted to play this idea that I was trying to play into something. So I always wanted to portray the character as vulnerable from the get-go, because I think that's a true leader we understand through their vulnerabilities and their understanding of everyone. And he comes from a very rough kind of background in the beginning, and we're still diving into that still as in his story, that it's about him finding himself. And I think it's one of those things where that's who I wanted to portray him as someone who is an everyday person, that people put this myth on him, that every battle and every journey he goes through, that the story keeps growing around him.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because I mean, obviously, when that name is next to your role on the sheet, there's a lot that comes with it, and a lot of other things that you've got to sort of, I guess, be like committed to. But from the previous iterations, is there one besides Cursed that you particularly like? Like, is there either Monty Python, maybe Sword of the Stone? I don't know, what you got?
I'll be honest with you. I really enjoyed watching Merlin as a kid, and Bradley James's version is really, it just felt like for that story, it made complete sense. And I think the great thing is, even Monty Python and all these things, I kind of take it back to like the whole Barack Obama thing. It's like everybody has a different version when they play him of that person, which you believe in. Jordan Peele's version is it's some moments you're like, oh, it's like a caricature of the character, but you're like, but no, that is Barack. That is him. And so I think that was the exciting part about playing this role, is every actor, I can't be Bradley James. I've got to bring my own version. So it was exciting to play that role.
No, it's really good. And you do a very good job with it. And it's funny that you mentioned Merlin, because it's another one of these like really sweeping, epic, multi-episode tales. And I know coming into this, that is like a totally different beast. So how did you approach this? Because y'all were on set for like 10 months, right? Shooting this really big story.
Don't want to even think about it again. It's yeah, it was such a wild journey, especially from day one when we got there, and Erica, the head of hair and makeup, would bring this board in, and she's like, this is what the worlds look like. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that this is what we were going into. And in terms of, I thought, okay, this is going to be a big journey, but it just kept getting bigger and bigger in scale. And I could see how excited the Netflix team were, and everybody was about bringing this story to life. And it's one of those things where it feels like it can only get bigger and bigger if it goes hopefully going forward. So, it's exciting. It's exciting. And I loved Merlin. So it's one of those things where I have a soft spot for all kind of versions of the King Arthur tale. And I think it's an exciting version too.
Yeah, I mean, Katherine talked about how much she had to go in to prepare for this. I mean, again, you guys are going in that like Game of Thrones, like really heavy levels of pre-production and scale. So what did you have to do? You doing the horseback riding, the sword work? Like how much did you have to spend?
It was so much. It was every day was you had to look in the mirror and be like, I can do something else. I can get better at something else. It's not just learning your lines. It's emotionally bringing the fantasy world to life is actually so different to playing a rom-com or playing anything, in terms of the emotions have to be so set in being a human being, because you have to let the visual effects do their thing. So you just have to do your job of connecting to the other person and really believe it, and to believe that someone has wings. It's like, okay. But it's, it was horseback riding, sword fighting, archery, boxing training, trying to feel like an athlete in that time. Well, not an athlete, but a medieval warrior or a soldier. So it was so much training. And then at the same time, learning your lines, bringing the emotion. But then once you learn all the techniques of horseback riding and everything, you can just trust your acting that you're going to be in the world. So it's a lot of work.
Tell Lord Grey River I'm insulted by this paltry show of force. Or better yet, I'll send you back as mole rats.
Our fans are huge Viking fans, so I'm sure they're going to love to see you in this. I'm very sure that they're going to enjoy your performance in this one as well. But why do you think people are so obsessed with the Arthurian legend? Why do you think they keep going back to it?
I think one of the things that is so appealing about the story is the question about the legitimacy and eligibility of power.
I love that. Elaborate.
Who is, suited to wield this sword, which is the symbol for the ultimate power? And what does this ultimate power do to you?
Oh, I think that is a really great take on it. And now I'm like, want to go watch all of the other Arthurian legends to see which ones address it the best. I think obviously this one, Cursed, addresses the best. But well, besides Curse, what would be the other one take that you particularly love? Like whether it be Monty Python or Sword in the Stone, like have you liked another take?
Those two, Monty Python, the Holy Grail, growing up, hilarious, and loved Sword in the Stone as a kid. So yeah, they would probably be my strongest impressions from this legend.
And shout out to Lady of the Lake is in Monty Python. He's one of the few ones that actually mentions her by name. So,
really?
Yeah, he does mention that he got the sword from Lady of the Lake in that one, which is like when he's arguing with the French dudes. So obviously, like I said, our fans really love June Vikings and are just obsessed with Vikings in general. Do you think maybe you have an affinity for these fantasy roles, or do they just come looking for you? Like, why do you think you keep going back to this epic sort of like grand sweeping tales?
Well, first, I think it's fun. I'm a fan of the genre. I grew up with fantasy. I grew up, when all the kids played football, I took fencing lessons and horseback riding because I wanted to be Robin Hood. I grew up with Errol Flynn's Robin Hood, and I wanted, that was the shit for me. So I think in that sense, I come prepared for the genre. I was into live role playing and stuff as a kid. So I think I have a love for the genre. And then also I have a strong theater background. I love the big expressions. I love having fun with my characters. So I think in that way I'm suited for it.
Yeah, and I will say you look like you're definitely having fun with Merlin in this one. I really love it. Is there anything besides, obviously, it seems like you're like a LARPer and horseback riding and fencing. Was there anything specifically on the set of Vikings that you brought into Merlin, whether it be how you approach the character, or just knowing how to, do these very long stories?
Well, I think it was sort of the technicalities of it. I've been on a big show already. I'm used to sort of the drill, and also like I said, all the physical stuff, so many hours we spent, stunt training for the different fights on Vikings, you know. So I didn't need a whole lot of fighting training for this one because I sort of came prepared.
That's awesome. Katherine talked about all the fight training and how it was like a big deal. Maybe you can tell me, I have to ask, will Floki be back on Vikings? Like, can I ask? Like, I know we don't say exactly whether his character is alive.
It's looking kind of like, if he was, I obviously couldn't, you know, reveal that, but it's looking kind of bleak because last time I saw, he was like, you know, caved in a cave volcano situation, and then I went on to do 2 TV shows since. But hey, here's to hoping.
This wretched thing belongs at the bottom of a well, Nimue. What have you done?
Obviously, this is a new version of the Arthurian legend, but I'm just curious, why do you think folks keep wanting to revisit the story?
I think everybody loves a bit of magic in all different forms, shapes, and sizes. That is one thing that people love to see. It's something otherworldly. And so I think that's why the legends are so iconic, really.
Do you have a favorite Arthurian legend, like, that you particularly enjoy?
Oh my God, don't I have to say ours? But if I don't say ours, I'd say Excalibur, the movie, is really good. It's such an epic film. It's so fun. I think Helen Mirren is amazing in it as well.
The cool thing about watching this show is it's such like a big story. Like, it's just like a really epic tale, you know, Game of Thrones style-y, but I'm sure that presents a lot of challenges trying to tell that story across 10 episodes, really kind of shooting like 10 little mini independent films. So how did you guys approach making that happen?
Wow, yeah, I completely agree. Like, it's such an epic show. There is no small scenes, there are no small moments. That it's everything is life and death. And I think the sets and the makeup and the costumes, everything is a reflection of that. It's kind of everyone. It's like that go hard or go home kind of attitude. You know, seeing people sit in the makeup chair for sometimes 4 hours at a time, you know, supporting artists coming in and having these incredible prosthetics put on and transforming them completely. And the sets are unbelievable. I mean, your jaw was literally dropping every single day on set. You know, there was a whole medieval village that was made in a forest. And that was one of those days where I just thought, this is unbelievable. You're right. It is like 10 mini movies. They're like movie sets. And so I was kind of blown away and really taken aback. It was just one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had in this profession. And, you know, once you add the horses and there's so many hours and hours and hours of work that go into this from so many different people that are working so hard to bring this to life. And so I'm really proud and excited to be a part of it and for everyone to be able to show off their work, you know, I can't wait.
You know, when we talked to folks like Katherine and Daniel and Devon, they definitely talked about how much work they had to do for the horse riding and sword fighting. Did you have to do a ton of that kind of work too to get ready?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't do any sword fighting or fighting kind of things in the show, but I do ride a horse, and I was absolutely terrified. I've not had any experience riding horses before. So it was definitely something I was really nervous about. But the team that we worked with to teach us how to ride horses were incredible. They were also the stunt team, an amazing group of people that really made us feel so safe and calm on set. And I mean, it's really difficult to be sat on top of this majestic animal, trying to speak as well as not die, as well as just like make sure you don't annoy the horse, and just kind of like there are so many different things at play that it's really quite terrifying, but it was good fun and I really enjoyed it by the end. I'd like to think I'm an okay horse rider now.
So again, this is the first time we're seeing Nimue, Lady of the Lake, told within the Arthurian legend. Everything usually normally starts after she gives Arthur Excalibur. Why do you think it's important to tell her story, and why is it interesting for folks to kind of see this part of the story?
I think when I first read the synopsis of the show, you know, and that sort of casting breakdown that comes in, I saw it's rooted in the Arthurian legends. And so I thought, wow, okay, I can't wait to read the script. And when I read it, I was a bit like, whoa, this is so different to anything I've ever really seen before. I don't really, it's like it's been completely mashed up and blended around, which is so exciting to see. And what's specifically amazing about it being from the point of view of Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, is that character is a character that we've never really seen fully fleshed out. Which is really exciting because there's so much to tell from this woman, and she's always kind of been this sort of water nymph really in the legends that kind of takes Arthur to the Isle of Avalon at the end of the tales after everything's said and done. So it's really amazing that we kind of start with her.
This Arthurian legend, like obviously this is the first time we're really seeing it from the Lady of the Lake perspective, but in general, we've seen so many adaptations like this. Why do you think it's a story that we just want to keep going back to and telling in different ways?
Yeah, Jacqueline, it's really interesting because it's a story that has kind of generationally just kind of been told over and over and over again. There's something that people obviously really respond to in this. And maybe it's this kind of, these characters, these love triangles, these sense of kind of right and wrong, the Knights of the Round Table, this idea that people like know what's going on, and are fighting for justice or, fighting for these things. And that there's some kind of sense that people across all ages and across all generations seem to kind of respond to this story. And I was, having read versions of it, I am kind of quite interested. I think it's just very interesting character storytelling at the end of the day. They're kind of intriguing, mythical characters that obviously represent something in all of us that we kind of relate to somewhere.
Yeah, it's been like a common theme when folks are talking about it, is just this idea of like being special and plucked from obscurity, and they all kind of have that. Yeah. Do you have a favorite take on it? Maybe Sword in the Stone, maybe Monty Python?
Yeah, well, my I'm a Brit, so Monty Python was my understanding of this it's only a flesh wound kind of thing. I remember watching Excalibur as a kid and just thinking, this is the weirdest, most bizarre, most kind of intriguing version of this story. It seemed like a kind of but I think you're right. Like, there's something about being chosen and a sword only coming out if it's you. There's this sense that like we all want to believe that there is something that only we can do. So I think in this story, people kind of tell it a lot of different ways, but Monty Python is definitely up there for me of the version of this story that I had first seen.
Yeah, and it shouts out the Lady of the Lake in that one, which
certainly does.
Yes, this view does. Also, obviously, all of you, but especially the Weeping, y'all had a lot of like horse fighting, sword fighting. Yeah. Talk about getting physically prepared for this one, because I know talking to Katherine, she said it was a lot.
Yeah, I don't know if Katherine told you, but we kind of all ended up on this farm in the middle of England, learning to kind of fight and do horse riding and stunts. And I can't think of a better way to get actors to kind of get better at a thing than to put other actors doing the same thing and getting better at it in front of your very eyes, so that you kind of have this competitive edge of kind of, oh, okay, right. Devon's, he's benching that and he's doing those. Okay, right. I got to go and do it. So that was part of it. And then for me, part of it was doing a lot of works that kind of on my own, and in terms of movement and doing things that I felt that would inform the character, especially in his ability to move. So taking ballet classes, and I took a foraging class. I went up to Scotland to take this foraging class where I learned to like live on, berries and nuts and things like that. Just things that I felt like would be a way of telling his story, because he doesn't say a lot, but that his movement and the way he interacts with nature would be an important part of this arc. So those were the things that I kind of wanted to focus on as well.
I'm Nimue. This is Pim.
Hello.
Why do you think this is a story that we keep wanting to revisit in either television and film and really any kind of medium, but even from different perspectives like this one?
I think because there's always another perspective you can tell it from. I think with any story, there, as long as there are, multiple characters within it, there are infinite perspectives you can tell it from. And as far as I'm aware, there hasn't really been a perspective from Lady of the Lake in terms of screen adaptations. I may be completely wrong though, and I haven't done proper research, but
on television, I think you are correct. There's been a few like animation. I think there was like a couple of ones. I did the research for you. Don't worry.
Really like your shirt, by the way. Your shirt's really nice.
Oh, thank you. I dressed up for y'all because y'all are so fancy on the show with all that like high level production value, which is actually my next question, because it is such a big production, like the costumes and the horse work. So what was it like sort of tackling this really long form? Because you guys were there for like 10 months, right?
Yeah, it was a long shoot. And the costumes the costume department is always my favorite department. No offense to all the other departments, but that's where I'm happiest. And that's where I feel as though I grow mostly into my character through the costume, especially when it's a completely different time, such as this one, Saxon medieval times. And although I did feel with some of my costumes, they did almost feel 60s and 70s. But yeah, I mean, you don't get clothes like that these days. So that was particularly exciting to indulge in that department.
No, I love the scale of it. I love the costumes. Also, I should have asked you this one. What's your favorite, like, of the previous iterations? Everything, there's like Monty Python and, Sword in the Stone. Do you have a favorite take besides Cursed on the Arthurian legend, like prior to this one?
There's, I want to say it's 80s. The cartoon, I'm pretty sure it was made in the 80s, but I can't.
Sword in the Stone?
Yeah. I love that cartoon.
Yeah, Merlin, and what was her name? The witch in that one, like the mad, the mad woman in that one. I loved her. Yeah. So I will ask you this one because I asked this one to Katherine and she had her own take. So maybe you'll back her or not, but Geralt of Rivia is like the king of Netflix like fantasy, and now I would say Nimue is like the queen. So going head to head, who do you think takes it in a fight?
That is a toughie. I actually, funnily enough, watched the first episode of The Witcher yesterday. I hadn't seen any of it yet, and there is some incredible sword fighting in that. But Katherine sure knows how to wield a sword as well. It would be a tight one, but I'm gonna be biased and I'm gonna say Katherine.
I think that's an absolutely good choice. You didn't have to do as much as she did, obviously, with a lot of the like stunt and whatever, but what did you have to do to sort of like pre-production, like get ready for Prim and like sort of bring her to life? Did you have to learn anything specifically different for her?
I didn't have to do I didn't have to do any sword training. I did some horse riding training because I had to ride.
Come on, man, blood. The horse is
bareback, because Katherine and we share a horse briefly, and she sits on the saddle and I sit behind the saddle. So I had to get used to riding a horse bareback because I had to sit on its like hip bones pretty much, which is pretty uncomfortable, but I got used to it. So that, yeah, in terms of training, that's as far as I went. And then the rest of Pim is just up to having a really positive mindset and going with the flow.
This is our only chance at survival.